Chapter 2 Austerity Budget. Dad used to complain that if the Bureau of Standards in Washington ever needed a precise definition or an exact measurement of a jack of all trades who was master of none, all it would have to do was build a glass cage, create a vacuum therein, chill to 0 degrees centigrade, and send for Tom. Tom had been with the family for 17 years as Dad's handyman. The title should not have been taken too literally. In a household whose routine was bound by a chain of efficiency, Tom was unquestionably the weakest link. Tom knew a little about everything, not enough to fix it if it were broken, but enough to think he could. He was unwilling to concede that any job was too big for him, or that he had not done a similar, but infinitely more difficult job before. He never forgot a mistake either, and so was able to keep making the same errors over and over again. Tom was of Irish descent, small, light-footed, and tough, and although no longer young even when he first came to work for us, he still clung to the belief that the bigger they came, the harder they fell. As a result, he sometimes presented a battered and swollen appearance and would walk around the house announcing darkly, "I don't take nothing from nobody, understand? Nothing from nobody." He was always evasive when asked how he had received the bruises, but would manage to leave the impression that 6 club-swinging bullies had sprang on him in the dark when his back was turned, and would be released from the hospital in a fortnight or so. Tom liked children and animals, and all of us were immensely fond of him. Before Mother left, she had decided it would be necessary to discharge either the cook or Tom, as an economy move. It never occurred to any of us, or to Tom, that he should be the one to go. "Why, Tom," Martha said, putting into words what all of us were thinking, "would be willing to cut off his right arm for us. And he would have, too. There was no guarantee, though, that in his eagerness to oblige, he would not have gotten rattled and cut off his left arm by mistake." So the cook had departed, and Tom had moved permanently into the kitchen. He now wore a butcher's apron and a chef's cap, and he boasted he had never followed a recipe in his life. This last was all too obvious. The discharging of the cook was the only economy measure Mother had time to effect. She hadn't said anything about our cutting other expenses, but Mother made it a policy never to tell us to do the things she thought we were old enough to do without prompting. When Mother said goodbye, for instance, there was no last-minute outpouring about being good and going to bed early and brushing our teeth and doing what Anne told us. We knew Mother wanted us those things done, so there was no need for her to repeat them. She may have worried, of course. She worried about whether we'd do them or not, but she did not intend to show any lack of confidence unless we gave her reason. There was no doubt that the immediate problem was saving money. For the time being, perhaps indefinitely, there would be little or no money coming in. And when there are 11 children in a family, there is always money going out. We talked economy in the dining room before lunch, an hour or so after Mother's departure. From an odor not unlike that of burning leaves, we gathered that Tom was having trouble with the cooking again. Part of the economy drive would have to be aimed in that direction. Anne had been left $600 to run the family during Mother's 5-week absence. That included the cost of our tickets to Nantucket, Massachusetts, because we intended to spend the summer at our cottage there as usual. Mother had made the boat reservations to Nantucket, an island off Cape Cod, and Anne was to pay for them when we picked them up. We thought it would be a good idea to spend only $300, and to turn the rest back to Mother as a surprise when she joined us at Nantucket. In the first place, Anne told us, there is the milk bill, 13 quarts a day, more than 3 gallons. Anne was sitting at Mother's place, at the head of the oval dining room table. As the oldest one at home, the senior officer present, she was automatically in command. 10 feet away in Dad's place sat Frank. The rest of us, including Bob and Jane, who were still in high chairs, sat around the perimeter. Anne had Dad's check stubs, some bills, and the family budget book spread out before her. "The milk bill alone amounts to more than $50 a month," she said. "I don't know how Dad paid for all these things. Cheaper by the dozen, nothing." We decided we could get along with only 9 quarts without anyone dying of malnutrition. "Each one of us is going to have to sacrifice a little," Anne continued, thumbing through the check stubs. She called out the amounts on the stubs and whatever they were for. Food and clothing. We were going to have to cut down on them. Doctor's bills. We didn't intend to have any. Dentist bills. Everybody's teeth that needed straightening had been straightened. Tobacco? Certainly not. Gasoline? We had already sold Dad's car. Dancing school. Frank and I, Bill suggested, could do our part by cutting out dancing school. Bill was 11, and it was a fight every Monday afternoon to get him into his Buster Brown collar and patent leather pumps. We couldn't ask you to do that, Martha smirked. We're willing to sacrifice a little, Bill said. Dancing school went into the discard, and Bill ran a relieved finger around his soft and unbuttoned collar. Also unabandoned were music lessons, which everybody sacrificed without too much reluctance. We drew the line at cutting allowances, since all of us thought Dad kept them trimmed pretty close to the bone. But we did institute a series of fines that would reduce our take-home pay. Leaving on electric lights or the cold water would cost the offender 2 cents, hot water 4 cents, failure to do any of the things on the process chart 5 cents. Dad had the household organized on an efficiency basis, just as an organized factory. He believed that what worked in a household would work in a factory, and what worked in a factory would work in a household, especially if the household happened to have 11 children. The process charts, first developed for industry, were an example. They told each of us what we're supposed to do and when we were supposed to do it. The charts were in the boys' and girls' bathrooms upstairs. They listed duties such as washing the dishes, making the beds, combing hair, brushing teeth, weighing ourselves, listening for 15 minutes a day to French and German language records on the phonograph, sweeping and dusting. Dad had things broken down to such a fine point that Lillian, who was not tall enough to reach tabletops and high shelves, dusted the legs and the lower shelves, and Ernestine did the tops and the high shelves. We decided we could eat much more cheaply if we cut out roasts and steaks, except maybe on Sunday. Ernestine was a good shopper, so she would plan the meals, stressing such items as frankfurters and baked beans, and would do most of the buying. We already got our canned goods from wholesalers, so we couldn't save there. Ernestine would also try to teach Tom the necessity of putting ingredients such as baking powder into the corn muffins, and of adding water to fresh vegetables before placing them on the stove. Martha, who was the most efficient of all of us and could keep her money the longest, was put in charge of the budget. She would also supervise the packing of clothes for Nantucket. We talked about the matter of college. Anne had just completed her sophomore year at Smith. Dad was not a college man himself, but he had believed that 2 colleges were better than 1. At Dad's suggestion, Anne had made plans to transfer that fall to the University of Michigan. Ernestine had graduated from high school the night before Dad died. She was registered at Smith and was to start taking her college board examinations in a couple of days. We knew Mother would not allow either of the girls to change plans. She insisted that somehow or another she was going to send us all through college. Dad had wanted it. As for our getting odd jobs to contribute to the income, maybe that would come later. For the time being, at least for the summer, all the older ones would be needed at home. I don't have to tell you, Anne said, looking significantly at the bigger children. A lot depends on how things go this summer. I wouldn't want anyone to adopt me, would you, Dan? Fred asked. Fred was 7, and he and Dan, who was 1 year younger, were inseparable. Heck no, said Dan. I wouldn't let anyone adopt me. Would you, Fred? Where did you ever get an idea like that? Anne asked. Nobody's going to be adopted, especially if everything goes smoothly while Mother's gone. By the time that Tom announced lunch was ready, all of the duties had been allocated, and the new economy budget was in balance. It was Ernestine's turn to bring in the food. She eyed askance a leg of lamb that carried in from the kitchen. It was burned almost black, and it was festooned with charred tomato halves, which looked as if they'd been part of the lamb, a part that needed lancing and bandages. Ernestine was the only member of the family who did not get along well with Tom. They had had a running feud that had started years before, when she had proudly presented him a picture of herself, and he had announced that he intended to hang it in the pantry as a rat repellent. Now, without saying anything but with the face of a martyr who intended to cooperate if it meant poisoning all of us, Ernestine placed the platter in front of Anne. Anne was caught off guard. What? She shouted in genuine alarm. Is that? Get it out of here quickly, you hear me? And tell Tom no one is in the mood for his jokes. It is supposed to be leg of lamb, Ernestine said through pursed lips. How do you know? Anne challenged distrustfully. I asked him, and that's what he said. Leg of lamb. Anne turned the platter around, studying the contents from all angles. Any lamb with a leg like that had better see a veterinarian, she said. I am beginning to think we should have kept the cook and gotten rid of that man, Ernestine announced. Hush, Anne warned. He'll hear you. I don't care if he does. Tom appeared red-faced and furious at the butler's pantry door. You don't, he shouted, reaching behind him to untie his apron. All right. Just for that I quit. Tom sometimes quit as often as 3 times in a single day, so the dramatic announcement did not have too much effect. I don't have to work here, you know, he continued. I ain't no slave. He took off the apron and waved it at Ernestine's face. No one wants you to quit, Anne told him. We all know we can't get along without you, Tom, don't we, Ernestine? Ernestine caught Anne's threatening glance and finally nodded reluctantly. I suppose so, she said. There, Anne smiled sweetly. You see? What's the matter with the lamb? Tom asked, somewhat mollified. Nothing, Anne replied, except that it seems just a mite well done. We like our lamb just a little rarer. It's lamb ragoon, said Tom, as if that inclined the argument. And the lamb ragoon has to be well done. Well, why didn't you say so? Anne said. That explains everything. Nobody ever gives me a chance to explain nothing round here, that's why, Tom mumbled as he disappeared into the kitchen, tying his apron back on. You work and slave to make them a special dish like lamb ragoon, and then they try to fire you. And after 17 years with the family, too. It still looks like something had better not be touched until the coroner arrives, Ernestine whispered. Lamb ragoon, Anne muttered. I've seen rubber boots that look more appetizing. Then, realizing as the oldest she was setting a bad example, she started carving and added, I'll bet it's good, though. Yummy, said Martha sarcastically. We'll try to get the cooking straightened out before Mother comes back, Anne promised. Come on now, get the rest of the food, Ernestine, and bring in some cold cereal, will you, for those of us who don't want lamb. Bill developed a high fever and broke out with spots that afternoon. By the time the doctor arrived, Ernestine and Martha were feverish and pimply. Ernestine wanted to cover herself with cold cream and powder and still take her examinations. But the doctor put us to bed. By noon the next day, all 11 of us were broken out and bedridden.